In this video, we're going to talk about how we can test our business rules. So we're here in the Business Rule Composer, and let me slide this little section down. We have our business rule for our loan policy, loan processing here. And what we want to do is take our instance file that we see here in this directory, and we want to test with it. So we're going to copy in the directory name. Then we're going to go back to the Business Rule Composer. And on your version here, you want to right-click and say Test Policy. Then from here we need to give the name of our file. So you find on here the schema that you want to attach. So these would be all the schemas that are available in this rule. And then when you click on the schema, the Add Instance button will turn from the grayed out state to an actual state, enabled versus disabled. And then here you're going to click or paste in the name of your directory, and then you're going to pick the data you want to work with, which is sample loan. Then here you can see that the sample file has been attached to that schema. In case later you walk away for coffee or something, you want to come back and you couldn't remember if you'd attached sample loan 1 or sample loan 2, you could see that right here. And then now you're ready to click the test button at the bottom. So right now it's basically firing the policy directly here from the Business Rule Composer. And even the short of a rule as we have here, you can see the output of this can be very long and tedious to kind of do by hand. But we're going to try to walk through it. So over here, notice again how many rules we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rules. So in here, what do we see? The first thing you'll see is a bunch of asserts. So notice here you have Operation Assert. It's asserting these rules. And then here, for instance, well, they're all going to be loan processing, be the rule name. But so what this has to do is getting our data inside our program or our business rule. So we see an assert for the Northwind database connection. We see an assert for our schema. And then we see an assert for this case root. And then we start seeing condition evaluations and fact activities, an agenda update. And at the end, what you're going to see, just to know you're at the end, you'll see a lot of retracts. So I'm just going to scroll down here a little bit more. Let's go all the way to the end. At the end here, you'll see retract, retract, retract. So there's 3. There's 4 retracts. So usually your retracts will kind of match your asserts that you saw at the top of the program. Now between these asserts and retracts, you'll see all the different activities that happen. So usually what you'll see first then is conditional evaluations. So here it says I'm evaluating, actually this is a select statement. So this is a select coming from our database, select star from customer info where ID equals 1 and his credit card balance is not greater than 500, and that resulted in a true. So let's go over here and look at that that rule having to do with the database. So I think that has to do with his commitments. And you see here it says if his credit card balance is greater than 500. Well, if we look at the input file here, there is no credit card balance in the input file. So what it was doing was taking this ID number and going to the database, which we looked at a few minutes ago, looks up this customer ID 1, and then returns the credit card balance of 500. So what you're doing here is this AND statement. When you see northwind.customerinfoid, this is basically your database name, your table name, and your column name, which is your primary key. And you're saying when that database primary key is equal to the key or the ID from our schema. So our schema was called Microsoft Samples BizTalk Loan Processor.case. So if we go back to our project here, you'll see the schema name is called case. And if we look up here, our target element name, it's called Loan Processor.case. And then for some reason they just kept the root element name as root, which is kind of strange. And then here's the ID that they're checking on. So now if we go back to the rule again, you're basically saying look up this customer ID on the database, and when you find it, if his credit card balance is greater than 500, then you're going to say compute commitments. So what happens here, ID number 1 is equal to exactly 500, right? So it's not greater than 500. Therefore, that rule is not going to fire. So if we look down here, there should be a negation of commitments rule that said if it's not greater than 500, we should say here ignore commitments. And again, if we go look at the output file that it created, don't know where my output file, oh, I think I ran the setup which deleted it again. Let me just rewrite. Okay, so here's our sample output file. And you can see that it said ignore commitments. So back to our rule again. That was this rule that fired that said the card's balance is less than 500. Now, let's go back to our test. So if you click back up here on the version number, and since we did a test a few minutes ago, our test results are still sitting here. So you can go click on these different rules, and then to go back and see your test again, just click on the version. That's not very intuitive, I don't think. So we were looking at this condition evaluation here, and it said, and not credit card balance greater than 500. So 500 is not greater than 500, therefore this rule was true. Unfortunately, it doesn't show you the results of what that rule does. That's why you have to go back over here. The other thing that's kind of sad is it doesn't actually give you the rule name. Like it'd be nice right here if it says rule set name, but that's basically your policy name. So there's a kind of a little trick for you there. When we get into the C# later, oftentimes these are called policies, but internally they're called rule sets, a set of rules. And then here's your 7 or 8 different rules. So I don't know why they don't give the rule name here that causes, for instance, this condition to be true. It does give you a GUID here, but that GUID apparently is the policy GUID, which is kind of not relevant to us. Then it says here we have a fact activity, and something operation was asserted, and this is a Northwind customer info. So that probably resulted when here we went and got the data from the database. And then here it says operation add, negation of commitment rule. And then we had a conditional evaluation. Is credit card balance greater than 500? It was not, so that is false. So you can actually see every rule here whether it fired or not. The next rule, you can see the result is false. And this is kind of neat. It actually shows you what two numbers it compared. It compared 3 and 18, and whether it was a less than or equal or whatever, that got a false. So here's the actual test it was doing. It was saying, is the employment type, time in months, greater than or equal 18? So the right side of the argument was 18. So this tells us that the time in months was equal to 3. So again, if we go look at our input file, or actually our output file, either one, we see here time in months was equal to 3. So in that rule, it was comparing 3 to 18. Back to the rule again here. And it says if 3 is greater than 18, then we're going to set one set of values. So since that has to do with the length of time a person was working there, that would probably be the employment status rule. And so here's our rule that we were just looking at. If the time in months is greater than or equal to 18, then we're going to say the employment status is invalid. If it's greater than or equal to, oh, that's the negation. And then the other rule was here, if it's greater than or equal to 18. I think they have a bug right there, right? This negation should, oh, they got a not in front of it. Okay. So here it says if it's greater than or equal to 18, and then they just put a not. You know, I might have put a less than 18 there. So the basic purpose of this video was to show you here this test function. If you recall, we did a right click, we did test policy. That opened this screen. We added an XML instance. And what you could do now, for instance, is remove that instance, and we could go test with a different file. So let's take our sample file here, called sample loan, and let's make a copy of it and paste it. And we'll call this now sample 2. Let's open it with Notepad. And let's make a couple little changes. Let's say time in months is now 30, and the place of residence is 45, and let's save it again. And now we'll copy this directory name again in case we need it. Go back to the business rule composer, add instance. It does remember the directory name we were in, so now we can click sample node 2, and now click the test button at the bottom. And the rules fire again, and this time potentially you would have gotten different results, and this is how you could trace through to see what exactly happened. In the next video we'll look how you can trace it by using the BizTalk orchestration.